Moving day is always stressful, but when your new house comes with a mysterious mirror, it can take things to a whole new level. Everything seemed fine until one day she caught her reflection doing something odd. Was this a sign she should have never moved in, or was it something else entirely? Let's find out. Alice had been living in the bustling city for years. She worked in a high-rise office building, and she loved every minute of the fast-paced lifestyle. But recently, things had started to change. She felt exhausted all the time. Her job no longer held the same excitement for her. She just wanted to get out of the city. So when her grandmother Mabel passed away in her quaint little cottage in Wales, Alice saw it as a sign. Her grandmother's cottage was small but charming, nestled amidst lush greenery in the heart of the Welsh countryside. Despite being small, it was everything Alice had ever wanted. However, before her grandmother passed away, Alice had only visited the cottage a handful of times, so she didn't really know much about it. For instance, she knew there were some antiques in the attic, but she had no idea what they were or how old they were. Then there was the parlor. It was pretty much untouched, and most of the furniture was covered in white sheets. All of this left Alice curious about what secrets the cottage was hiding. As soon as she moved in, she noticed that the locals kept warning her about something, but they never explicitly told her what. They just said, "Beware of the mirror." When she asked them why, they would just shake their heads and walk away. This confused Alice, but she decided not to worry about it and focus on unpacking instead. The main bedroom had an antique mirror though, and it took up almost the entire wall behind the bed. It was intricately carved and looked like something straight out of a fairy tale. Although it was old, it was still in perfect condition. Since her grandmother had taken such good care of it, one evening, while Alice was getting ready for bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. At first, she didn't think anything of it, but then she realized that her reflection was moving a second too late. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but the next night, the same thing happened again. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, and she quickly turned to look at herself in the full-length mirror. She watched intently, trying to see if she could spot another strange occurrence. And sure enough, it happened again. Her reflection moved a split second slower than she did. At first, the difference was so slight that Alice almost dismissed it as a trick of the light, but now she could tell it was intentional. Her reflection began to smile at her, but she wasn't smiling. Then it blinked, but she hadn't blinked. Its mouth moved as if it were about to say something, and even though Alice wasn't looking at the mirror, she could feel its gaze upon her. She turned back around, but there was nothing there. Either it was her imagination or there was something else going on. Over the next few days, the phenomenon continued. Every time Alice turned around, her reflection did something weird. It stared directly at her. It moved by itself, and it made all kinds of gestures as if it had a mind of its own. It was happening more and more frequently, and Alice was starting to get scared. She had no idea what was going on, and she was starting to think that she might not be alone in the house. Then one night, Alice's reflection didn't stop staring at her. She had gotten used to the fact that it sometimes stared at her and then did something strange. But this time, it didn't blink. It just kept on staring at her. She tried to ignore it, but it wouldn't stop staring, and she was starting to get creeped out. She wanted to break the mirror, but she didn't want to do it without knowing why. What if there was a reason behind the mirror's behavior? That's when she decided to do some research. She searched online to see if anyone else had experienced anything similar, but the only thing she found were stories about haunted houses and mirrors that were portals to other dimensions. Alice threw herself onto her bed and pulled the covers over her head. She tried to sleep, but she couldn't. The mirror was right outside her bedroom door, and every time she closed her eyes, she could feel its gaze upon her. When the sun came up, she got out of bed and went to the mirror. She stared into it for a long time, but there was nothing there. It was just her reflection. She sighed and walked away, but as she did, she heard a voice. It was a whisper, but it said something that made her freeze in her tracks. It said, "Help me." She turned around, but there was no one there. She searched the room, but she couldn't find anyone. Then she went back to the mirror and looked inside, but all she saw was her own terrified face. She tried to convince herself that she was just imagining things, but deep down she knew that there was something in the mirror with her. She could feel it watching her every move, waiting for her to make a sound. Every time she turned around, she could hear it whispering her name, and each time she looked in the mirror, she could see its reflection moving slightly out of sync with her movements. One night, Alice was awoken in the middle of the night by the sound of someone tapping on the glass. She sat up in bed and listened intently. Was that a tap she had just heard? She wasn't sure, but then she heard it again. Someone was definitely tapping on the glass. She got out of bed and walked slowly toward the mirror. As she approached, she could feel the cold glass pressing against her skin. She reached out and touched it. It was freezing cold, and as she pressed her palm against the surface, she could feel the tapping coming from the other side. She could also hear the faint sound of scratching. Was someone trapped on the other side of the mirror? With trembling hands, she began to bang on the glass, but when she turned around, there was no one there. Then she remembered what the locals had told her. They had warned her about the mirror, but she hadn't listened. Now she wished she had, but it was too late. She could feel the presence behind her, and she knew that whatever was on the other side of the mirror was trying to get out. Suddenly, the mirror cracked, and a dark, shadowy figure began to emerge. It was tall and thin, and it seemed to be made of smoke. It reached out a hand and grabbed onto Alice's arm. She screamed and tried to pull away, but it was no use. The creature was too strong for her. It dragged her toward the mirror, and she could feel its cold, icy touch all over her body. She looked back at the mirror and saw the creature's reflection staring back at her. Its eyes were glowing red, and it seemed to be smiling. Then it did something that made Alice's blood run cold. It raised its hand and tapped on the glass. From the other side, Alice could see that the tapping was coming from the other side of the mirror. She reached out and touched the glass. It was freezing cold, and as she pressed her palm against the surface, she could feel the tapping coming from the other side. She could also hear the faint sound of scratching. Was someone trapped on the other side of the mirror? With trembling hands, she began to bang on the glass. But when she turned around, there was no one there. Then she remembered what the locals had told her. They had warned her about the mirror, but she hadn't listened. Now she wished she had, but it was too late. She could feel the presence behind her, and she knew that whatever was on the other side of the mirror was trying to get out. Suddenly, the mirror cracked, and a dark, shadowy figure began to emerge. It was tall and thin, and it seemed to be made of smoke. It reached out a hand and grabbed onto Alice's arm. She screamed and tried to pull away, but it was no use. The creature was too strong for her. It dragged her toward the mirror, and she could feel its cold, icy touch all over her body. She looked back at the mirror and saw the creature's reflection staring back at her. Its eyes were glowing red, and it seemed to be smiling. Then it did something that made Alice's blood run cold. It raised its hand and tapped on the glass. And on the other side, Alice saw something that made her scream. Thanks for watching. If you're new here and you like the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out and helps me grow. And if you want more paranormal videos, check out the playlist in the description.